Hey guys, Will here. Now we get to review some really exciting and interesting stuff here at Boosted Media, but it's been a very long time since I've been as excited to share a product with you guys as I am today. This is a Qubic Systems BT1 belt tensioner system, and the reason I'm so excited about it is because it brings something to the table for sim racing that I have not experienced before, despite some of the crazy gear that we've tested here in the past. So what we'll do today is take you through all the details that I think you need to know about the BT1, whether you're looking to purchase one of these things or just interested to know more about what this kind of technology is like. So let's dive into the Qubic Systems BT1. So we do have quite a bit to get through today. I'm going to try and keep this as focused as I can on what it's actually like to drive one of these things, because I know that's what the majority of you are most interested in. If you are interested in a teardown, want to see what this thing actually has inside, let us know in the comments down below. If there's enough interest, we'll do a separate video covering that. But yeah, I want to try and keep this as to the point as I possibly can today to keep it as short as possible. Now, just before we do get started, firstly, a big thank you to Qubic Systems for sending across the BT1 for us to check out. If you do decide you want to pick up one of these or any other sim racing gear, head over to boostedmedia.net or just down to the description box down below this video. There you will find a bunch of discount codes and affiliate links. That's an awesome way of helping support the channel and save yourselves a little bit of money in the process as well. So we really do appreciate your support there. That's what keeps us going. But as is always the case here at Boosted Media, no third party, including Qubic Systems, has any sort of input into the video at all. They did provide the product to us free of charge to test out, but that is the extent of it. So what we're going to be sharing today is purely just my own opinions and my own experience using the product. So with that said, let's dive in first of all with pricing. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while now, you might already be familiar with Qubic Systems. We have tested out a couple of their motion systems in the past, including the QS-BT1 that I have beside me here as well. And we have a couple more videos coming up on that pretty soon as well. So make sure you stay tuned for those. So they're certainly no stranger to high-end sim racing gear. And that being the case, this does come with a pretty high-end price tag. So they actually call this thing the king of entry-level immersion, which I think is a little bit strange given that we are looking at a 1,390 euro price tag here, and that is before you factor in any sort of shipping costs or import duties or anything like that. So if you are looking at one of these, do shop around. There are a couple of resellers around the world. You may be able to find yourself a better deal locally than importing one of these. So just make sure you do your own research there. But yeah, 1,390 euro for this thing. And look, I mean, it does sound very expensive. When you put it in the context, which we'll be exploring in today's video, I actually don't think that it's too bad value for money when you consider how expensive something like an active pedal from SimuQB is, for example, or even just a more basic motion system these days. You're still looking at, you know, double or more the price of something like this. And as you'll see in today's video, the amount of immersion that this gives you, not only immersion, but also the information that it gives the driver to allow them to understand what the car's actually doing underneath them, does actually mean that you are getting a lot for the money with this compared to a lot of other things that we've tested in the past. So just keep that in your mind. I'm certainly not trying to convince you that everybody should go out and spend this kind of money on something for sim racing, but definitely more so with this than a lot of other very expensive sim racing products that we've tested in the past, including some crazy high-end wheels and things like that. I do think you're getting a lot more for your dollar here than you are out of, you know, something like a really expensive multi-$1,000 steering wheel, for example. And everybody's going to have their own preferences there, but yeah, sounds expensive for a box with a couple of straps coming out of it, but it does do a lot for the driving experience, as we'll explore today. So with that said, what are you actually getting for your money here? What exactly is a belt tensioner system? So you've got a big metal box here that has two straps coming out of it. These straps are connected to a direct drive motor internally, and these basically just bolt to a seat belt. So you bolt the backs of these to your seat belt, you then have the seat belt come over your shoulders, you anchor it to the sides of your seat or to the sides of your rig, and then what happens is these straps pull independently of each other, so it's actually a two-channel system. Each belt operates independently, and that is able to simulate things like the feeling of braking. So when you hit the brakes, it can pull on your shoulders. As you're cornering, it can pull on the opposing shoulder as well, basically to give you the sensation of sustained G-force inside the rig. Now, sustained G-force has been a bit of a holy grail in sim racing for a long time. It's kind of been the one thing that's been missing. And look, it is still missing to an extent. You'll understand a lot more about that later on in today's video as well. It's not replicating the middle ear kind of sensations that you get from movement, but it does certainly give your body a lot of cues to replicate the kinds of sensations that you would be feeling in a real life race car. So it's very cool. So look, it's very simple in the way it ultimately works, but the difference between a good implementation and a bad one with something like this makes all the difference. So we'll certainly be exploring that in detail today as well. But yeah, so a two-channel system, each belt belt is able to operate independently, and that gives us all kinds of different effects from, like we were just talking about, braking and cornering, all the way through to more high frequency and granular details like changing gears, engine vibration, curb effects. And we'll go through all the different effects that this can generate one by one as we get on through today's video. So now that you understand exactly what this is, let's talk a little bit more about some of the hardware here. So as I mentioned before, there is a direct drive motors inside here, 2 channels, 1 to operate each belt. As I said before, we will pull this apart separately in another video if you guys are interested to see exactly how it works. But look, we have disassembled a lot of Qubic System products in the past, and we've always been very impressed with the build quality. There's been absolutely nothing of concern whatsoever. Very high quality, industrial grade type stuff. So absolutely no reason to suspect that it wouldn't be exactly the same here. But again, let us know in the comments below if you do want to see the insides, and we'll make that happen for you guys. So what happens is this big metal box here bolts to the back of your sim rig. Now do just be mindful that this guy does weigh 12 kilograms. So if you are running an existing motion system, given that this is going to be bolting onto the back of the rig where the majority of the weight is already, because that's where you sit, you will just need to be sure that it's not going to tip you over the edge in terms of your payload capacity for the particular motion system that you might be running. So just do your own research there. Make sure you're not going to run into any nasty surprises. We're running a D-Box G3 on our daily driver rig, and we had absolutely no issues whatsoever. I didn't notice any difference in the response at all. So yeah, that was absolutely fine, but your experience may be different, of course, depending on what rig you might be using. Now, if you do happen to own one of the Qubic Systems motion systems, this does integrate very nicely with those as well. There are some mounting brackets that I'll show you a little bit later on, and different mounting options depending on the rig that you have. But this is going to be compatible with the majority of aluminium profile cockpits that are out there. So look, in terms of other bits and pieces inside the box, yeah, you get the box itself with the 2 straps as I described before. You get a couple of additional little brackets here. These basically slot over your existing seat belt. So what you would do is you would kind of feed it through like so. It locks into place, and then the front plate will bolt on like that, and that will hold it all in position. I'll show you a couple of pictures on the screen now so you can see exactly how that's done. But yeah, look, it doesn't include a seat belt, which I think for the price is a little bit unfortunate. Look, I know a lot of people are gonna have, you know, subjective preferences when it comes to the seat belt that they might wanna use. I actually have a Sparco 4-point harness that I have had for many years now on my rig, which I integrated this with, and I didn't have any issues at all. But, you know, when you're paying, you know, €1,500 almost, I would have expected them to at least include a basic seat belt system, so it's there, and then if you want to use something more expensive, you can, but unfortunately that is not the case. If we spin the unit around quickly, you'll notice, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do this because it is so heavy. Let's tip it up on its side like this, and I'll just flip it over like that. So you can see 4 mounting holes in the back here, and those coincide with mounting holes on these brackets which are included. So you use the included bolts to bolt through to these brackets, and then the brackets will mount on like so, pretty much like that, and then they'll bolt onto the back of your rig, and these are spaced out so they'll fit on aluminium profiles. So you've got 40mm spacings here, and are also compatible with some of the next level racing cockpits like the GT Track, I believe, for example. So just check the details on the Qubic website for a compatibility list, but as I said, it's going to be compatible with most aluminium profile cockpits that are out there without too much drama. There are just a couple of requirements when it comes to how close it needs to be to your seat, as well as when it comes to the seat itself. So you will, of course, need to have little cutouts in the back of your seat to allow the straps to come through. If those are too high up, so if the belt's having to go up and then down over your shoulders by too much, then you are going to have a loss in fidelity. Likewise, if the holes are too low as well, you're going to have problems too. Now, we'll mention that on my particular rig, the holes were a little bit lower than ideal, but didn't seem to impact the performance at all, so seemed to be absolutely fine. But obviously, you will just need to be mindful of that if you know that the holes are high or low, or you don't have any holes at all on your sim racing chair. So just make sure that the seat you have or the seat that you're intending to buy will be compatible. Now, they do include as well some little low friction inserts, which will actually sit on the inside the holes of your chair and allow the belts to slip more freely over the threshold. Now, unfortunately, all 5 of the seats that we have here at Boosted Media weren't compatible with these. Either they were too fat or too skinny, or just didn't fit in the holes at all. What I actually ended up doing on my seat is just putting some gaffer tape over the threshold just to protect the seat and allow the belts to slip nice and easily. As long as you don't have any sharp edges that are going to fray the belt over time, these aren't absolutely essential. And obviously, it's going to be impossible for them to make them suitable for every single seat that's going to be available on the market. But yeah, that is what those things are intended for, and it's good that they do include them. As I mentioned earlier, they do include all the mounting hardware that you're going to need. And I was actually happy to see just little details like the fact that they include little dome nuts like this rather than standard nylock nuts or anything with a sharp edge, because these do have the potential to rub against the back of your seat. So having a nice smooth surface like that is going to minimize any damage. So again, just little details like that we've come to expect from Qubic Systems that, you know, do make a difference and do sort of tend to be an indicator that they've paid a lot of attention to detail and they do know what they're doing. So also included are some little sticky pads to stick the low friction inserts onto your seat once you've got them in the right position. They also include some little star washers as well as part of the mounting hardware. Now, separately to the belt tensioner box itself is included a giant power supply that's not all that much smaller than the unit itself in terms of width at least. So that comes with a nice long and very flexible power cable. Now initially I was kind of thinking, I'm not a big fan of the fact that the power supply isn't just integrated into the unit, but obviously they're trying to reduce the payload weight as much as they possibly can. So I do actually think that it's a good choice to have the power supply separate from the unit. Now, in case you're wondering, the power supply is a switch mode power supply, so it'll take a 115 or 230 volt AC input. The output rating is 13.4 amps at 24 volts AC. Now, the actual maximum power consumption, remembering that you're not going to be sitting at this most of the time, is 320 watts rated power, 4 amps at 115 volts AC, or 2 amps at 230 volts AC. So it is quite power thirsty when it's running at maximum, but keep in mind, this thing is able to pull a pretty significant force of 20.5 kilograms per channel. So yeah, I mean, that's realistically enough to simulate, at least in my experience, the kind of forces that you would experience driving a real life race car. So it's more than capable of simulating that, which is obviously what's most important there. So in terms of other inclusions, you do get a nice 3 meter long USB A to B cable, and it does have an angle connection on the back because it actually plugs into the underside of the rig. So all the connections are kind of hidden away when it's all set up. There is a little key here as well. It's basically just like a little bypass jumper, and that is intended to bypass the emergency stop, because unfortunately, and this is a bit of a gripe that I have with this, they don't include an emergency stop button. Now, if you do happen to have a Qubic Systems motion system that has an integrated emergency stop, this will integrate into that system, and they do include another cable that actually allows you to achieve that. So you basically plumb this guy into the control box for your Qubic motion system, and that allows you to shut everything off with the one emergency stop button. But you know, when you're paying this kind of price, I would have expected to, as I said before, include some seat belts and include an emergency stop button, because if things do go crazy, you know, with that kind of force on your shoulders, even though it's not going to injure you realistically, you know, it can be quite uncomfortable, and you know, there might be some scenario where things just go crazy and you know, you might want to hit an emergency stop. But in my opinion, at least, it's something that I think they should have included. Now, otherwise, yeah, really the only other thing to tell you about here is just a couple of cooling fans in the front here. So it does generate a little bit of noise in the background. As you'll see later on, it's certainly nowhere near as loud as anything like a, you know, a motion system or haptic feedback system or anything like that. Pretty much silent in operation other than just the sound of the cooling fans. The cooling fan in the power supply that we looked at just before does tend to whine a little bit, so you might want to sort of tuck that away from you, but we do have a nice long power cable there that allows you to achieve that. And then if we have a quick look in the front here, as well, as you can see in this footage here, we've got this kind of Knight Rider LED thing that in idle mode just kind of bounces from side to side, and then it also responds to telemetry inside the game as well, so it can operate as like an emergency stoplight flashing and just like brake light. You know, it's a gimmick. It doesn't really serve any actual functional purpose on the rig, but it does look quite cool. And I can imagine if you had one of these installed in some sort of like a sim racing center or something where you got people watching, it does add a little bit more excitement to the rig overall. So a nice little touch there, but certainly not anything that adds to the experience for the driver. And look, I think that's everything that you need to know about in terms of hardware. As I said before, if you do want to see the insides of this, if you want to hear a little bit more about how it actually works internally, given that it is direct drive, there's no cogs or anything like that. It is the motors connected directly to the belts. Yeah, let us know in the comments down below. But I think for the context of today's video, you guys just want to know what this thing is like to use. So let's jump in now and take a look at my first impressions driving with and without the motion system. Then we'll take a look at the software configuration, and then we'll jump forward in time to after I've spent a whole bunch of time driving with this thing. And then after that, we'll fast forward in time. I'll take you through the software configuration side of things, and then yeah, take you through all the details of what this thing is actually like to drive with after some more experience under my belt. So all set up and ready to go for my very first drive with the BT1 belt tensioner tension assist. I've been looking forward to this one for a very long time. Now, those of you who are OGs on the channel may remember many, many years ago now, I installed the Next Level Racing, which is actually made by the same company that also runs Qubic Systems, motion systems. I put the seat mover system on my rig and was absolutely blown away with the immersion, having never experienced anything like that before. Now, you may also remember I did later on build a belt tensioner system into that simply by just using some ocky straps or some bungee cords attached to the seat belts, which were attached to the back of the frame. And then when the seat moved independently of the frame, it would naturally kind of pull on my shoulders as I was driving. Now, I stopped using that system when we moved across to the D-Box from the Next Level Racing seat mover, and I haven't used a belt tensioner system since then. So it's been a good 4 or 5 years now since I used that system. There are a couple of things that I really loved about that, but there are obviously some limitations there as well. So it's going to be really interesting now to see exactly how this compares. Now, what I've done here is I've completely disabled all the motion and haptics on the rig for now, just so that we can focus purely on what the belt tensioner system is doing. I know a lot of you guys that might be interested in buying one of these won't necessarily have motion on your rig. So I want to give you the kind of standalone experience first, and then we'll switch the motion back on as well, talk about how all that integrates as well. And yeah, I'm very excited to see how this goes. So let's head out. We're in the Ferrari 296 GT3 in iRacing around Spa. Track and car combination I'm very familiar with. As soon as I started moving there, I felt the belts tension up on me. I am just running the default settings at the moment. Obviously, there are a lot of adjustments that we'll go through a little bit later on. When I change gear, I feel the belts tighten on me, and as I go faster as well, they are tightening up here. I'm gonna hold it flat. Oh! So as I go around the corners, hopefully you guys can see in the footage, but it's pulling on my shoulders depending on which direction I go. So if I'm turning to the right, it's pulling on this shoulder as if it's kind of as if I'm leaning into the seat in that direction. So I'm gonna brake really heavily now. Oh! That is really strong. So I have no idea where it sits right now in the greater scheme of what it's actually capable of, but in terms of strength, that is. But when I brake, it really, really pulls on my shoulders. So I'm just gonna experience this for a little bit before I run my mouth too much, because I want to really sort of get an understanding of what my brain is experiencing here. Now, you've heard me say before in a lot of videos that immersion in sim racing isn't necessarily about trying to create the most realistic sensation, and that might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but for example, your brain is trying to respond to cues. You're never going to be able to reproduce sustained G-force in a home simulator, you know, with a conventional motion system. That's one of the things that I'm really excited about with this, is that it potentially can give you that sensation of something pulling on your shoulders continuously as you accelerate or brake. So we'll analyze that in more detail as we go too, but you've heard me say many times that adding additional immersion isn't always about trying to create realistic forces. It's about giving your brain additional information, additional cues, additional sensations that you can then use to decipher exactly what's going on with the car. So one of the things I'm paying very close attention to here is whether I'm actually able to feel physically more connected to the car, or whether it is purely just immersion, whether I actually feel a sensation of seat of the pants through what's going on here. Remembering that I have switched the motion off here, so I am feeling less connected to the car than I would normally as a baseline anyway. But turn in here. I'm concentrating hard here, trying to decipher everything that I'm feeling. So immediately on the positive side, it does give me a very convincing, sensation's probably the wrong word, but it does convincingly give me that information, that sustained G-force information that my brain needs. When I brake, I immediately feel it tension up around my shoulders, and it maintains that level of pressure on my shoulders throughout the entire braking phase. As I trail brake and I lift off, it slowly loosens off. I'm not feeling any sort of sensation of latency or anything like that at all. I don't really have an accurate way of measuring the latency, so I'm not saying that there isn't any. What I'm saying is that I don't feel any perceivable latency. which is obviously the important thing. So it does definitely give me more of a sensation. Braking in particular, the cornering is more of an immersion thing, I think. I haven't gotten the car sideways or anything yet. We will test a couple of different cars before we get into our conclusions, of course, and we'll switch motion back on as well. But just driving around at a relatively leisurely pace here, it's definitely more the acceleration and braking that I think gives you more of a feeling of what's going on with the car. But it's not going to allow you to feel things like, you know, lockups and tire slip and things like that. It's more just the sense of speed, I'd say, is where it's really kind of coming into its own. But then on the negative side, there is a little bit of a disconnect between what my brain is expecting to feel and what I'm actually feeling through the seat of the pants. Now, I'm sure most of you guys would understand this, but in case some of you don't, the sensation of movement and G-forces primarily comes from your middle ear and the sensation of movement there. So that's why you might get motion sick, for example. If what your body is experiencing and the you know, what your brain is interpreting through the movement of your middle ear, if that doesn't match what you're actually seeing, then that's often what induces motion sickness. So if you're looking out of a car window and, you know, not feeling, or you're on a boat and the movement that you're seeing inside the cabin doesn't match what's actually going on with your body, that would be what induces motion sickness. Now, I'm not feeling any sort of sensation of motion sickness at all. So there's certainly not, you know, it's not immersion braking or anything like that. But what I am sensing is a little bit of a disconnect, as I was saying, between what my brain's expecting and what I'm feeling. And that's simply because when I brake, so here, for example, I brake, and you probably even saw me there. I kind of went like that physically. Now, that wasn't the motion rig doing anything. That was me kind of, you know, I guess simulating with my body what should be happening in real life. And it's just kind of happening naturally because of what I'm feeling in my shoulders, which is quite strange. But I feel the sensation of the belts tightening on my shoulders as if I was being thrown in my seat. But of course, there isn't any actual G-force there. My middle ear isn't moving at all. So it is quite a strange sensation. It's not a realistic sensation at all. Now, whether or not we can develop that into something that my brain is able to use as a cue to feel what's going on with the car better, that's something that we'll visit later on. Obviously not something we can really talk about in the first impressions section of the video. But it definitely doesn't have that same, oh my God, wow factor that I had when I had the seat mover and the bungee system. And I think that's because we aren't running any other motion here, so I don't have any sensation of physical movement other than just what I'm feeling through my shoulders. And that's creating a bit of a disconnect. Now, there would, of course, also be the fact that back when I did that video, I'd never tested anything like that before. So it was all new and exciting to me. Now I've got a lot more experience with a lot of different systems. So it is, you know, it's hard to get a rise out of me like you used to be able to with a system like that. But there definitely is a sensation of disconnect between what I'm feeling, what I'm seeing, and what my brain thinks I should be feeling, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just sort of complete this lap, pick up the pace a little bit, and really focus on what I'm feeling through the corners. See, that does feel quite convincing. When I go around those bends, I feel the sensation of G-force through my shoulders. And again, I'm not feeling it in my body, but it does definitely give my brain the cue that I'm going around a corner very quickly. And I'm actually finding I'm quite a lot slower right now than I would normally be, just because my brain is adjusting to all this new information. It does feel, it's making the whole thing feel fundamentally different. Now, normally I can adapt to a new sim rig very quickly because I'm so used to testing different gear, different pedals, different wheels, different bases. I'm usually on my normal pace pretty darn quickly these days, you know, within sort of 10, 20 minutes. But this is changing it quite significantly for me. So we'll just finish off the lap. It's not going to be a quick one because I do feel kind of out of sorts here. I'm certainly not trying to say here that this is going to make you slower. That's certainly not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying it's going to take some time to adapt and adjust to all these new things that are going on. Remember, I haven't made any adjustments to the tensioner system yet either in terms of its power and its calibration, but to be honest with you, it actually feels really good straight out of the box. There's nothing obviously too powerful or too lacking that immediately screams out to me that, oh, that needs adjustment. So usually when I'm testing equipment like this kind of stuff, immediately I can kind of go, yeah, I want to turn this up, I want to turn this down. This actually feels pretty good as it lies. But yeah, not having it working in tandem with a motion system, I think is the missing ingredient here for me right now. Simply because when I feel that sensation in my shoulders, my body is expecting to be, you know, feeling the sensation of moving forward in the rig as well. When I accelerate and those belts loosen a little bit, my body expects to feel like it's being thrown backwards, but that's just not happening. So what I think we should do now is let's switch the motion back on. I'm going to switch it on at the level that I would normally drive with, which if you guys have watched any of my motion system reviews would know, I always say less is more with motion. As I was saying, you just kind of want to feel the cues. You don't want to be sort of being thrown around to the point where the car's driving you rather than you driving the car. So let's switch the motion back on at the normal level now and see whether things kind of fall into place. I have a feeling that they might, but yeah, let's check it out. Okay, so jump straight back in the car. Motion system is back on now. I'm feeling all the vibrations, all the haptic feedback that I'm used to feeling now with the belt system on top of it as well. So let's see if things fall into place more naturally now. So on the brakes, and I don't have, as I was saying, I don't have a lot of motion here. I'm not being thrown around all over the place, but it is moving my middle ear. It is giving me those sensations of movement that hopefully will match what I feel through the belts. Remembering again that I haven't done any sort of calibration or adjustment here at all. This is purely just straight out of the box settings. So through the corners, I've got a little bit of movement going on from side to side as I brake. Okay, yep. There it is. There it is. Okay, so now I only dipped down a little bit there, but just that slight sensation of movement gave my brain the information that was missing before. It made it feel natural. Now again, it may be to an extent that it's just because I'm used to driving with motion. But look, I do a lot of driving without motion as well in our test rig, and I don't normally miss it all that much under those sort of circumstances. Whereas with the belt tensioner system running, I really did notice that the motion was missing. It really sort of, I guess, exacerbates that whole aspect of, you know, you're getting some information but not everything. But this now feels very, very, very convincing. What I'm feeling through my shoulders matches exactly what I'm feeling through the motion platform. I'm not running the Qubic System motion platform. I'm running a D-Box on this rig. We do have a couple of Qubic motion systems here at the moment, and we will at some point, I'm sure, test this out with those. But I wanted to sort of, you know, I didn't want to sort of make out that you had to have all of their gear to make this work properly. I wanted to test it with other brands, other combinations, no motion at all, to see what that would be like. But this is very, very, very good. I'm getting that smile on my face now. You can probably see it. That cheeky little grin when something when I experience something that genuinely surprises me and something that gives me something that I've not experienced before. That's what it takes these days to get a rise out of me, and I'm getting that grin on my face now. I hope it comes across in the video. What it's doing is I'm getting, when I hit the brakes, I'm getting that initial little bit of movement. And through the corners as well. But of course, the rig will dip down for that initial little bit. But then the belts will continue to hold tension. So as I brake, the combination of the two gives a much greater sense of sustained G-force, which is the thing that's missing on motion systems normally. And I've tried out Sway in your systems. I've tried out Surge systems as well, and none of them have ever really convinced me, simply because there is a hard stop. There's a limit to how much they can move. And then once they've moved off axis, once they've moved off center, they have to, of course, come back as well, and that gives you that sensation of disconnect and sort of floatiness that you've heard me describe before. This isn't giving me any of that. This is not doing anything weird when it has to release or return to center or anything like that. It just simulates what I would be feeling really, really accurately, which it was doing all the time. It was doing from the get-go. It was just that because I didn't have that motion in my middle ear to sort of tie in with it, it felt weird. Now, it feels absolutely fantastic. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do a whole bunch of driving, a whole bunch of different cars, a whole bunch of different scenarios, really get to know this thing intimately, and then we'll come back probably tomorrow, I would say, and not in another video. We'll obviously make it part of the same video, but in terms of us recording this, I'm gonna spend a whole bunch of hours tonight driving with this thing. We'll come back tomorrow and I will give you my overall driving impressions, and obviously if anything changes over time, of course, as well, we'll do an update video. I'll also spend a whole bunch of time tweaking settings and adjusting things as well to see whether there's anything that I'm missing or anything that I can tweak to make feel even more realistic. But right now, straight out of the box, remember as well, this feels really, really, really cool. It's giving me that grin on my face again. So let's go through our Rouge again here. Yeah, the cornering forces on the shoulders, maybe not so convincing. But the sensation of braking and threshold braking, trail braking, lifting off, very, very convincing. And it all, like, I wouldn't quite say that it's the missing piece in terms of sustained G-force simulation, because you're not getting that continuous middle ear movement when you're, you know, being thrown around from side to side. But of course, you know, under braking scenarios, you know, you do get that initial dip, and it's more sort of, you know, your sensation of G-force rather than your middle ear actually moving past that initial little bit. So the motion platform is able to give you that initial cue. It's everything beyond that that's normally missing, and that's kind of what this is providing. So suffice to say, as an initial impression, I am extremely impressed with this thing when it's used in combination with a motion platform. Okay, so it's a couple of days later now, and I've had the opportunity to spend many hours with this belt tensioner system, really experimenting with everything. And yeah, I now have a much better understanding of what I'm doing, and yeah, feel like I'm ready to share some more information with you. So what I want to do firstly is jump into the software, run you through some of the settings there so you get a better understanding of all the things that you can and can't do with this. And yeah, then we'll go into the wider driving experience and what this thing is actually like to live with day to day, and then wrap things up with conclusions. So let's take a look now at the Qubic Manager software and some of the things that we can do behind the scenes with this belt tensioner system. So Qubic Manager software, if you've run any sort of next level racing electronic product like their motion platform, their traction loss system, or their seat mover, as you might know, they're actually manufactured by Motion Systems. You can see their little logo down here, which is also the parent company of Qubic Systems. It all gets a little bit confusing, but basically what you guys need to know is that it's essentially the same software package across all three brands. So if you're familiar with this software from a Motion Systems product or a next level racing product, it works exactly the same way here. So essentially what we've got here is a button for each one of the games that their products support. You can filter this by just games that are installed, which I'm actually going to do right now. Or you can filter it by whatever you want, or just type in the name of the game that you want to use. Now, back in the early days when I first had the Next Level Racing seat mover, one of the big gripes that I had with this software was that it didn't automatically detect the game that you were playing. So you had to actually go in here and click on the profile that you wanted to load before you launched the game. And if you forget, and then, you know, your gear wouldn't work, and it was just a hassle. But nowadays, thankfully, it does auto detect, which is really nice. So on the right hand side here, you've got a couple of diagnostic tools. Not really any need to go into that for today's video. One thing I will say is they do have this thing called Action Center, which is quite powerful. So there's nothing in here at the moment, but if there is a firmware update or if a game isn't configured properly that it detects is installed, it'll give you either an automatic correction for that. So it'll give you a button that you can press to put whatever settings in that need to be done to make the game work, or it'll give you instructions for actually setting that up or let you install the firmware update and so forth. So it's quite good at, you know, keeping you passively aware of things that need to be done without bombarding you with notifications and just being annoying. So I think they've actually done that really nicely. So let's just click on one of these profiles as an example. We're going to click on iRacing. And this is a profile that contains all the settings for any device within within their ecosystem. So if you've got a Qubic Systems motion platform, for example, or a traction loss system, something like that, that's all going to show up in here as well. You can see we've got our seatbelt tensioner system here, and then if we had a motion platform, it would list underneath that as well. And then you would click on each one to reveal the settings pertaining to that particular device. So just like what we see on most sort of high-level sim racing ecosystems these days, everything is integrated into the one software package. Now, as we mentioned before, in the first impressions section of the video, you don't have to run their motion system with this product. You can run it with any other brand. Just be aware that there may be some limitations depending on the software. Obviously, we haven't tested every single motion system out there. Some may read the telemetry out of the game in a way that conflicts with this software. If that does happen, there is a UDP relay feature built into this software. And what that does is it pulls in the telemetry data into their software, and then it relays it to a different port, which you can then point the other software to allow you to operate on multiple ports without any conflicts. So that's great that they have that feature there, and they've had that for many, many years. I actually used to use it on the seat mover that I had many years ago. So what we have here is all the settings for this particular iRacing profile for our seatbelt tensioner. Now, if you do want to set up multiple profiles for different cars within a individual sim, you can do that. All you need to do is just clone the existing profile, and then you can set it up however you want. So you can have as many profiles as you want for different games, different cars, and so forth. This is just the default profile with a couple of tweaks that I've made to fine tune the belt tensioner to exactly what I like. And we'll go through that in just a second. One other thing that is worth mentioning here is if you do want to save a profile and share it with your mates, you can do that. You can see the little sharing button here. You can export your preset to a file and send that or distribute it however you want, or you can also upload it to their Discord database if you have a Discord account, which most people do these days as well. And that's basically like a sharing database where you can pull in other people's profiles and so forth. Very similar to what we see within the Simucube ecosystem. So yeah, they've pretty much got all the bases covered here in terms of, you know, the basic functionality that you would expect from a product of this class. But let's have a look now at some of the settings. This is a good way of getting a better understanding of the individual effects that this thing is capable of as well. So we've got our main adjustments here under main, and then we've got SFX as well, which is like a fine tuning or granular adjustment for some of the more high frequency effects that this is capable of producing. And you can see we're able to actually individually adjust various different frequency bands for various different effects. So you've got your engine vibration frequency, for example. You can fine tune that depending on the car that you're driving. And as we scroll down here, you can see we can have effects like rev limiter, for example. So it'll vibrate the belts when you're bouncing off the rev limiter, which I actually hate. I always switch that off, whether it's a motion platform, a haptics feedback system, or something like this. I just don't like it. But you can see through here, we've got wheel forward slip lock. So that'll give you sensation of locking up a wheel. Slip angle as well, rumble strip frequency, rumble strip intensity, ABS active, and so forth. Now, these are the default settings that you're seeing here for these particular settings. Look, honestly, I didn't really feel the need to adjust these. All I did was just make sure that rev limiter was switched off. But for those of you who have haptic feedback systems or motion platforms on your rig, I would recommend spend some time in here and really fine tune things and adjust things to make sure that you're getting the most out of each individual component. What I mean by that is, say for example, if you've got a haptic feedback system on your rig that produces things like engine vibration and rev limiter, for example, then you might want to allow that system to do those things and not have it go through the belt tensioner system as well, and allow your belt tensioner system to focus on the things that it's best at. And the reason for that is that you don't want to be just completely oversaturating and overloading your sensors with all the effects happening everywhere. You want the effects to kind of be coming from, you know, areas that make sense on your rig. So, you know, for example, if you've got ABS kicking in, you might want to be feeling that underneath your brake pedal with a haptic feedback system or an active pedal, and you might not necessarily want to feel that chugging through the seatbelts because it's not as realistic. So hopefully that makes sense. That is a quick breakdown of some some of the settings that are available under SFX. Then we go across to main, and you can see again, this basically just breaks down each individual effect, and you can fine tune and adjust here. So I have made a couple of changes to the default profile here. This is by no means my final settings. I probably will continue to fine tune this further because I am going to be leaving this on my daily driver rig. I do absolutely love it. But we've got our braking effect, pretty self-explanatory, and you can see we do have nice little tool tips for every single one of these effects. So it is very clearly explained. There's no ambiguity as to what each thing does. So braking effect, you've got gain, sharpness, and dead zone adjustment for each one of these effects. There's an acceleration effect as well. They do actually recommend that you have this switched off. What it will do is it will slightly tighten the belts, depending of course on how you've got it adjusted as you accelerate, which just feels a little bit backwards to me. And you know, they kind of recommend the same thing, but if you want to have it, you do have it. So sideways acceleration, this is the effects that you feel as you're cornering or trail braking into a corner. So I actually wound that back a little bit from 100%. I've got it down at 85%. I was just finding that it was a little bit unrealistically strong for me, and again, it is very subjective, but I just cranked that down a little bit. Centrifugal force, so as you can see described here, this kind of enhances the cornering and trail braking effects. I wound this down a little bit as well to 90%. So then we've got bounds. This is basically just like the tension that's on the belts when there's no other effects in effect. So I just left that alone. That was absolutely fine. So vertical G-force, this is going to give you the sensation of the belts tightening as you sort of bounce up and down in your seat. By default, this was switched off. I left it switched off simply because I have a motion rig which already has heave in it. So it didn't really make sense to sort of be trying to do the same thing in two different areas, kind of like what I was describing before. But by all means, experiment with this. If you don't have motion, it is a good way to sort of simulate that movement up and down. It does kind of still feel a little bit like what I was talking about before though, where it just feels a little bit unnatural because your middle ear isn't actually moving up and down. So yeah, I just found it felt a little bit unnatural to me. Side slip, pretty self-explanatory, gives you the effect of oversteer or traction loss. Road harshness, again, I left this off because my motion platform does haptic feedback. Didn't make sense to have the same thing generated in two areas. So then finally, pre-impact protection. Now this is a bit of an interesting one. If the vehicle's acceleration exceeds thresholds defined for longitudinal or lateral, the belt will be tightened for a specific period of time to reduce unwanted body movements during the crash simulation to ensure your safety when the simulator is also equipped with a motion platform. Now I actually found this one to be quite immersive. I did deliberately crash into a couple of walls at high speed and have a couple of moments where I was impacting with other cars and things like that just to test this out. And it does kind of, you naturally, when you're about to hit a wall, you tense up and you kind of grip everything. And this kind of adds to that effect. So the belts tighten up, everything kind of grips up. And yeah, it does actually add to the immersion of having a crash. The whole protecting you against, injury when your motion rig is crashing, that's probably a little bit silly, but yeah, I did actually find that this was quite immersive and I did quite enjoy that setting. So that's a quick rundown on the adjustments that are available here. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of the individual effects that this is capable of producing and how you might want to set this up depending on what other hardware you might have on your rig. But yeah, look, I mean, all bases are pretty much covered here and you can fine tune and adjust things to your heart's content. Really, all I ended up doing here was just reduce the intensity on a couple of effects that were already being produced by other things on my rig. But look, for somebody that doesn't have any sort of other motion or haptics on their rig, honestly, the default settings were pretty darn good. And yeah, I mean, I would still definitely recommend spend some time adjusting and fine tuning things to your preference. But yeah, out of the box, it was actually a really good experience. So let's move on now, talk more about the driving experience overall. Now I've had the opportunity to spend a good number of hours using this thing, and then we'll wrap things up with some conclusions. So the big question here is, novelty factor aside, once you get over that initial wow factor, what is this actually bringing to the table in terms of the driving experience? What's actually new here? And I'd say the one thing that really stood out to both me and Tom when he drove on it as well was you do get a better sensation of how quickly you're slowing down. Now, typically, when we talk to real life racing drivers that have transitioned across to sim, the one thing that they really struggle with is the sensation of the car underneath them, because they're having to rely on visual cues rather than seat of the pants feeling. And a lot of you guys have experienced that, when you first jump into a sim rig, or when you put a friend in a sim rig for the first time, they're just all over the place because they haven't developed that skill of being able to rely on what they're seeing visually rather than what they're feeling through the seat of the pants. So this is something that does genuinely allow you to feel what's going on with the car more accurately. And that works under a couple of different scenarios. So the one, as I said, the one that stands out the most is, your trail braking. So as you hit the brakes, you really feel everything tension up. You get a sensation of, you know, stopping, and then as you start to lift off the brake, as you trail brake into the corner, you start to feel the forces in the corner as well. So you can kind of, you can work with the traction circle. You can feel the shift in tension through your body. So you can kind of transition across from being, you know, tight across your entire body to easing off as you turn in. You start to sort of, you know, learn to modulate the pressure that you're feeling through your shoulders, so that as you brake in, you feel a certain amount of tension, and then as you start to trail brake off, you try to maintain that level of tension on your left shoulder if you were going through a right-hand bend. And doing that actually allows you to modulate around the limit of that traction circle a lot more accurately for those of you who are jumping in lots of different cars regularly. And I think that's probably the key point here, as is the case with any sort of haptic feedback system. If you're an absolute pro at sim racing, you're always driving one car and, you know, you've absolutely mastered that car around a certain track, you've already nailed all your braking markers, you already know exactly what you need to do. Something like this isn't going to make you faster if you fall into that category. But if you're like me and you're sort of a bit of a jack of all trades and master of none, you like to jump in a lot of different cars, different sims regularly, you are going to feel more at one with every car that you drive immediately. And I think that's probably where the primary value of this product lies in terms of speed and consistency. But of course, on top of that as well, you've also got all the extra immersion that this adds to the experience overall. And this definitely does add a new layer of immersion over the top of any other haptic feedback system that I've ever tried before, including, you know, the highest of high-end motion systems that we've tested over the years as well. So this isn't something that I think replaces motion or substitutes for motion. I think it's something that adds a new layer on top of what we experienced before. So it's a very exciting product for that reason alone. But yeah, look, as we were discussing earlier on in the initial impressions, it does feel a little bit weird when I run it without motion. Now, you do adapt to that over time. I did spend a good probably 4 hours or so driving last night with the motion system turned off, just to sort of see how I adapted to it over time. And just like what we were discussing before with, you know, when you jump into a sim rig for the first time, you adapt and you start to learn to rely on visual cues. It did start to sort of normalize over time, and it didn't feel so weird. But, you know, nothing is going to replace that sensation that you get in your middle ear, like we were talking about, where, you know, when you brake, you actually feel the sensation of your body moving forwards in space rather than just things tightening up around you. So it doesn't necessarily feel realistic in that sense, but it certainly does add, you know, those layers of data that your brain can use, not only to be faster and consistent, but for additional immersion as well. But I still do stand by what I said in those initial impressions, that really where this comes into its own is when you combine it with a motion system that does give you those inner ear cues. And when, you know, you're starting to get that little bit, and it only needs to be the subtlest little bit of movement, but when you actually start to feel the sensation of your body physically moving in space combined with the pressure across your torso, that's where it really comes alive. And that's where you saw the grin on my face. It was just like, yes, this is what was missing. And in terms of immersion, at least, that really is a game-changing thing, because nothing that I've ever tested before, and you know, we've tried pretty much everything here by this point, has ever really given me that sensation of sustained G-force. You know, it ties into what we were saying before with the traction circle. If you're really wanting to sort of teeter right on the edge of that, you need to have as much information as possible to really understand what's going on with the car. And even if it doesn't feel necessarily, you know, exactly the same as what it feels like in real life, if you've got information there that your brain can use as a cue, you're able to use that to, you know, add to what you're doing. So yeah, that extra layer of haptic feedback that we're getting over the top of anything else is definitely something that I would consider to be game changing, regardless of whether you're just looking for immersion or looking for something that would potentially allow you to feel what's going on with the car a little bit more. But like I said before, and I want to reiterate this again, if you are an absolute sim racing pro that's already nailed a car and is already lightning fast, you're probably not going to find it's going to make you any quicker than you already are. It's going to be for those people that, you know, need to be able to feel what's going on with the car more to be quick in the first place. And I'm sure that any real life racing driver that jumps in and tries one of these things will be absolutely blown away with it for that reason, because it's going to make them feel more at home. It's going to make them feel more like what they experience in reality. And there are a couple of other really important factors here as well, just in terms of practicality. One of the things that I really appreciate about this is that it is almost completely silent in operation. There is a little bit of a whine from the cooling fan, but other than that, you know, you're not getting these horrible clicking and, you know, gear noises noises or anything like that. It doesn't sound like a jackhammer running. You know, a lot of motion systems that produce haptic feedback at high frequencies can be very loud to the point where, you know, they're just not practical in a shared space where, you know, somebody might be trying to study or work or sleep in a room next door. And for that reason, a lot of other forms of haptic feedback are just completely out of the question for people. Whereas this is something that you are going to be able to run in those environments without any issue. And that is something that I don't think should be understated. So I guess where I trip up on this product a little bit is where I would actually place it in the hierarchy of you know, things that you might want to buy for your sim rig. Now, I want to preface this by saying that you don't need any of this stuff to enjoy sim racing. You know, we're talking about really high-end stuff here, and the last thing I want to do is, you know, try to convince you guys that you need to go out and spend, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to, you know, to be able to go out and sim race, because that is simply not the case. And we've got a lot of videos that we've done over the years where we discuss that in more detail. So if you're thinking that, you know, block that out of your mind immediately. You can absolutely enjoy sim racing and be fast without any of this stuff that we're talking about here. But if you have the means and you're looking at buying one of these things, yeah, this is where I start to trip up, because on the one hand, I feel like this complements a motion system so well. On the other hand, this is one of the only things that I've ever experienced that's actually able to come anywhere close to giving the sensation of sustained G-force through corners. And I do think that in terms of getting a good sensation of what the car's actually doing, in terms of things that are valuable to driving quickly and consistently, this probably is more valuable than a motion platform is. A motion platform is great for immersion, feeling the sensation of what the suspension's doing in terms of, you know, going over bumps and things. And if you don't have a system like this, it will also allow you to feel the sensation of how hard you're braking, because you can have the rig tip up as you're braking into a corner and then tip back as you start to lift off. And that just starts to play into what we were talking about before, about giving you a way for your brain to interpret how hard you're braking, how quickly you're slowing down. Motion systems are really good as well, if configured correctly, at giving you a sensation of how the car is behaving on the edge of grip. Also the sensation of weight transfer inside the car as well. And that was one of the reasons why I tested the M2 specifically in iRacing earlier on, because that's a car that you steer with your feet and with the balance and weight transfer of the car almost as much as you do with steering input. So if you don't have those sensations, it is a lot more difficult to drive a car like that quickly. So yeah, trying to unpack this, I think that if you fall into that category that I was discussing earlier of people that, you know, are a jack of all trades and master of none, you haven't absolutely perfected your skill inside a car relying on visual cues, I think that I would probably benefit from this in terms of speed and consistency more than I would benefit from a motion rig, because I think that the feedback that this gives you is more tailored towards the things that are going to allow you a better fundamental understanding of what the car's doing underneath you than a motion system is. But having said that, a motion system can give you a lot of the same cues that this can give you if you configure it in a way that is conducive to doing so. So yeah, I'm really, honestly, I'm a little bit on the fence about this one. I keep on kind of flip-flopping in my mind between the two of them. You've got to factor in the price here as well. This is a lot cheaper than, you know, most motion systems out there, but I do feel like you're missing out on some of the immersion that this system can give you if you don't have a motion platform to complement it with. And again, like, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to convince you guys to rush out and go and buy a motion platform. And, you know, I'm not trying to say that you need one to, you know, to enjoy this. This is an absolutely fantastic standalone product as it stands, but you know, a motion platform does allow you to really extract the most out of this. And I mean, you guys could see for yourselves in my first impression, really where my face lit up, where I really sort of started to go, wow, was when I combined it with the motion. Without the motion, it did just feel a little bit strange. Although, as I said, I did start to adapt to it over time, and I was able to use those cues to the benefit of my driving. So just before we wrap this up, the other comparison that I just want to quickly make is against the value prospect of something like the Simucube Active Pedal. Now, you'll remember my initial impressions video of that was very, very positive as well. My takeaways are very similar to what I have with this, but that is a very expensive product too. I think that I would buy something like this over an active pedal. I do think that this adds more to the overall experience, immersion, and cues that you can use to drive faster more than the active pedal does. The active pedal, I've found the primary benefit from that, and again, watch my review of that, but really, you know, understanding what's going on in braking scenarios, being able to teeter right on the edge of ABS kicking in, for example, and then just the ability to fine tune the brake to feel like any car that I want to drive is really where the benefit is for that. But I think that this is a better value for money product that's going to give you more in the driving experience in general than the SimCube Active Pedal does. Now, there are a lot of other products coming out now along those kinds of lines that are a lot cheaper. SimMagic have been teasing an active pedal. I know that Moser have got an active pedal that's coming very soon as well. We'll be testing that out very soon here on the channel, so very excited for that. But yeah, look, I mean, all these technologies are getting cheaper over time, but as it stands right now, if you were kind of, you know, trying to decide, oh, do I buy an active pedal or do I buy this? I would definitely buy this over the active pedal for now. I think it's going to add more to the experience overall. So look, guys, to summarize, I would go as far as to say that this is my favorite product that I've tested since the SimCube Active Pedals, which was well over a year ago now. I think it's probably the most game-changing product that I've tested in that time as well. And the reason I say that is because it is genuinely adding a new layer of haptic feedback that I haven't experienced before with any system that I've tested, from, you know, crazy hexapod style motion rigs all the way through to more subtle vibration transducer type systems. If you're in the lucky position to be able to afford one of these things, you are going to absolutely love it, whether you have a motion system or not. But if you do already have a motion system, that is really where I think this thing really comes into its own and it really comes alive. I certainly wasn't disappointed with it without the motion system, but once I had the motion turned on, everything just kind of made sense. And the level of immersion that I experienced with this was beyond anything that I've experienced before, which I think says a lot. So guys, yeah, that is my review of the BT1 belt tensioner system. There are a lot of nuances here simply because what this is going to add to the experience for you is going to vary depending on what you're looking to get out of your sim racing experience in the first place. But I think regardless of what it is that you're after, this does have something for everybody. Whether the value for money prospect is there is purely just going to depend on what you're looking at getting out of the system overall. So I really hope that today's video has helped you to better understand whether this might be something that is worth the money for you. It is a very expensive product, so it is a very important consideration. It's certainly not something that, again, I'm going to say everybody needs to aspire to own. You don't need to buy products like this to enjoy sim racing, and I want to make that absolutely abundantly clear. But if you are in the lucky position to be able to afford something like this, yeah, you are going to absolutely love it. I think it's an absolutely fantastic product, and ultimately it is as simple as that, guys. So really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well so you don't miss out on future videos. We probably will continue to revisit this over time as well. I will be using it on the daily driver rig moving forward too, because I love it that much. So yeah, make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos about this and many other sim racing products as well. And yeah, if you do decide you want to pick up one of these or any other sim racing gear, check out boostedmedia.net for all the latest deals and discounts. That is an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media without it costing you a cent, and in some cases also saving you guys a little bit of money as well. So check that out for all the details, boostedmedia.net, and I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.